Chapter 22, Cuauhtémoc. Wanyanyekevu called for Jom and Obey to come to his tent, discussing the situation thoroughly. "What can you guys tell me about a city called Cuauhtémoc?" Wanyanyekevu asked. Jom, shaking his head. "Not much other than I heard of it." Obey agreed by saying, "Same here, but I heard of a lot of activities down that way as well, but never been there." Wanyanyekevu stood there looking at the city's map. "Check around the entire camp and see what people know of this place, and get with me in the morning, during Umkumbi, with the rest of the warriors." Jom and Obey said, "Will do." Wanyanyekevu stood there looking at a map, trying to figure out why his people were there, of all places. Early during Umkumbi, his 9 top council, Raphael's son, Jamie, and an additional 8 warriors, Maliha, Abba, Avani, Shana, Tiago, Hannah, Kenji, and Nunothat, whom Jom found out that they had been there at least once. They all sat down to see what they could find out about the city of Cuauhtémoc. Shana said, "As a prostitute, myself, Avani, Abba, and Malia were sent there from time to satisfy the men there. But as far as what goes on in those parts, we do not know. The men never spoke to any of us about their work there. Actually, they never asked us anything. They usually just gave us commands." Nervously and afraid, Avani walked forward and fell to her knees, crying, "I have been selling my body since I was 12 years old, and I." So overwhelmed she could not speak. Wanyanyekevu stood up and approached her, hugged her, took her hands and looked her in the eyes. "My dear sweet sister, know this, Sabbath is not ashamed of what you were, either should you, for it was not your own free will, but they forced it upon you. He is proud of who you are now. Remember this, the evil one prevents us from moving forward in our lives because of our past. You are the most precious thing in Sabbath's eyesight, a woman, a deliverer of life. Without women, there cannot be men. Go and live your life without shame and teach others, who have been through the same thing, that they too can live a life with Sabbath. If you desire to be married, tell that man your past, what Sabbath rescued you from. If he accepts it, marry that man. If he cannot, dust the dust from your shoes and continue, for he too still has problems of his own. He who loves Sabbath will forgive you as Sabbath forgave him. Give that man your all, and you'll never be ashamed again. For even Sabbath says there is no large sin, no small sin. Sin is sin." Wanyanyekevu hugged all the women as they all began to cry and walked out of the tent. Returning to his seat, everyone in the tent was crying. Wanyanyekevu, wiping tears from his eyes. Okay, stop it. You four." Trying to keep his composure. "Is there anything you can tell us about this city?" Tiago, Hannah, Kenji, and Nuno stood there for a moment, and Nuno came forward. "All of us except for Kenji work in the incinerator. I worked in another city, just south of there for 2 years. One day a friend of mine named Celso accidentally got stuck by some kind of needle. When it was told to the supervisor, he was never seen again. I asked about his whereabouts and was sent here the same day." Wanyanyekevu asked, "What was it you were putting in the incinerator?" Nuno looked back at the men. "Guessing, 'cause I never really seen the inside of the bags. Biohazard waste and dead bodies." Wanyanyekevu started thinking for a bit, then told the men, "You 3 may go." Then he said, "And you, Kenji?" Kenji approached the council. "For years me and my family worked as slaves, my grandparents, my parents, and even my brothers and sisters. I'm the youngest of them all and I'm the only one living today. At 9 years old, when I started. I'm 30 years old, as of yesterday." Everyone said, "Happy belated birthday." Holding back the tears, Kenji continued, "Thank you, as a youth, I learned not to ask questions, especially anything about what the Abenians were or was doing." He held his head down and rubbed his fingers across his eyes as he raised his head. Kenji then said in anguish, "They murdered my entire family right in front of me because my grandfather refused to work anymore. It wasn't until they sent me here 3 years ago that I started to map out a plan on how I was going to kill Abeni B6. But that day you killed him, whatever it was, I had said to myself, I would never leave your side. Raphael's son, Jamie, shouted. What? Abney B6 is dead. He stood there in shock for a moment. Abney B6 is who we were waiting for. He's the one over the operations in Laguna de Bustillos. A vicious and cold-hearted Abenian that I have ever seen, and you mean to tell me you killed him? Wanyanyekevu pointed at his counsel. We killed it. Jamie got on his knees. I am forever in your debt, for I am sure me and my family would have been dead today if you hadn't killed him. Wanyanyekevu said. It. Jamie scratched his head, and Wanyanyekevu said, You will learn what it is in due time. Wanyanyekevu stood up, approached Kenji and Jamie, and hugged them, saying, And that's exactly what you two shall be, but even more, you shall be a friend and a dear friend at that. For you will be with me without being with me, my 007, my equalizers if you will. Wanyanyekevu looked at Kenji and asked, What is your gift with which Sabaoth has blessed you? Kenji said, Self-healing. Wanyanyekevu turned to Jamie. Jamie, we'll have to wait for your gift and enlightenment, but according to these logs and the people, there was supposed to be a shipment of new slaves a few months ago. No one showed up. No sign of another ship, even coming to this location, which makes me feel as if he was doing something behind the rest of their backs. Jamie interrupted. Abney B6 operation at Laguna de Bustillos is continuous, whether or not he comes. Because of the heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, and marijuana merger that he, Alpha Quebec 1, and Oedipus have together. Wanyanyekevu said. There goes those names again, AQ1 and Oedipus. Why, am I not surprised? Okay then, Wanyanyekevu said. After the surveillance of Cuauhtémoc and until you two get trained. He took a deep breath. As a matter of fact, Obey and myself will train you too. I need to send you both to El Paso. I need to know if they were running a renegade outfit, or were they trying to fulfill some kind of mission. Tell no one and report to no one, but one of us here in this room. Wanyanyekevu then said, Kenji, please continue. Kenji continued. Well, as a child, my job was cleaning up, and in my teenage years I too worked the incinerator, and by 20, I was withdrawing blood from new slaves as they looked for the oldest DNA mutated strain to learn how to eradicate it. They were looking for ways to erase your race by using biological warfare that would only destroy your people's DNA strain. But there are at least 3 more levels that go down in that place. I do not know what they are doing on those levels. Jamie interrupted. Researching and testing synthetic drugs. Kenji kneels and starts drawing on the floor as he continues. It's built much like a box or rectangle about 30 yards by 130 yards. This is inside the lake called Laguna de Bustillos. You have one small 2-story building here, and there's a communication tower and another tower on the east side that controls the large doors that open up when the ship arrives. The ship rotates at 0 to 180 degrees back to 0, then it does a 360-degree turn, but when it unloads, it sits hovering over the lake, and it does a 260-degree turns, and a light beam empties the bodies. They are alive, you can see them moving, but they are wrapped in some kind of gel. Wanyanyekevu stood there listening, then suddenly stared off into space and stood up. Kenji, you, Jamie, and Obey discussed the matter in detail. I have something heavy on my heart. Our training will start first thing in the morning. Wanyanyekevu reached for the intercom, and with great pain, shouted, I am Maikumbi! The entire camp came running. He walked outside and stood on top of one of the small buildings, speaking into the microphone. Forgive me. I have forgotten your pain, my fellow warriors, and you are not just warriors. You are my brothers and sisters. If you know that your loved ones are alive or think that they are alive, please go and find them. If you find peace and want to stay, by all means, stay and tell of Sabaoth goodness. But know this, you are all welcomed back with open arms. But those that return with you must serve Sabaoth to stay here. Many of the people started talking amongst themselves. Wanyanyekevu continued. How many of you would like to go see if your family is still living? 47 had raised their hands. Go now, but I'm afraid you must go afoot because we do not have enough resources for each man to have a horse. But go, and find out, and if they return with you, so be it. If they do not and you want to stay, you shall stay, but if you return, please return with seeds, livestock, and things that will help us grow. Go in groups and stay in groups until it's time to part ways. Waninyekova jumped off the building and returned to his tent for the rest of the day. Early the following day, after training with Kenji and Jamie, a group of 8 people headed west, followed by a group of 12 headed north. By noon, a party of 13 headed east before the last group prepared to head south. Waninyekova stopped them. Aldhib and his wife Joy, along with 7 more, shall accompany you to see about this city of Cuauhtémoc. With strict orders, he told Aldhib, Joy, and their crew. Stay in the shadows and watch and observe. However, everyone must carry their communication devices, but no communication between you, except in an emergency. Return within a week or 2 with a report. You need at least 1 speedster. Axel raised her hand. Okay, because if one of those spaceships arrives, I want to be there. As they all left, there stood Waninyekova with Jom and Nariglisser. Nariglisser said, Okay, everyone has at least a week's worth of ration. That leaves us with 45 men and women and about 2 weeks' worth of food for us, but we got the lake filled with fish. Sabaoth is able. Waninyekova smiled. Sabaoth is able. Listening to Nariglisser speak, Waninyekova said, Hold on, don't you have something for me? Nariglisser smiled. As a matter of fact, I do. Clearing his throat, Nariglisser smiled. I first came across, in the Song of Solomon, chapter 1 verse 5, as he opened the Torah. And it says, I am black but lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Do not stare at me because I am black, for the sun has burned me. My mother's sons were angry with me, they made me caretaker of the vineyards, but I have not taken care of my own vineyard. So, this is King David and Bathsheba's son. So, when it said my mother's sons were angry with me, I concluded that King David and his ancestors were also black. Smiling, Nariglisser said, You see? He said as he continued. Now turn with me to Jeremiah 8 verse 21. For the hurt of the daughter of my people am I hurt. I am black. Astonishment hath taken hold on me. Nariglisser closed the Torah. Was Jeremiah black as well? I remember reading how the Jews of Arabia were the ones that accompanied the Queen of Sheba and her son back from their visit to Israel. And many of the leaders and inhabitants of Ethiopia became Jewish and seized political domination of ancient Ethiopia, which was called Aksum back then. Many say that this was the religious center that contained the Ark of the Covenant brought from Jerusalem by the offspring of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, Menelik I. Also, according to Acts of the Apostles chapter 8, verses 26 through 40, an Ethiopian eunuch, a servant of Queen Candace of Ethiopia, was baptized soon after the resurrection. You see, in early church records history books, Eusebius, a Roman historian, said that this man returned to Ethiopia, where he spread his faith. The king of Aksum soon embraced Christianity and declared it the state religion. So, Ethiopia was the oldest Christian nation in the world, meaning that Ethiopia was a Christian country long before Ireland and other parts of Europe. Ethiopia was closer to what Christianity was like before it became entangled with notions derived from the imperial ambitions of Rome. And check this out, Nariglisser said. Waninyekova replied, Okay, I'm checking. Nariglisser could not stop smiling and laughing as he got excited talking to Waninyekova. Queen Candace was no joke herself. She was Empress of Ethiopia when King Alexander was on his world-conquering rampage. Queen Candace was world-famous as a military tactician and field commander. They say King Alexander could not entertain even the possibility of having his world fame destroyed by risking defeat, especially by a woman. He stopped his armies right at the borders of Ethiopia and did not invade, because he was met there by the waiting black troops with their queen in command. She arranged her armies strategically to meet him, and was present on a war elephant when he approached. Having assessed the strength of her troops, Alexander withdrew from Nubia and headed to Egypt instead. Another story claims that Alexander and Candace had a romantic encounter. The Romans met several queens of Meroe, whom they thought were named Candace. They did not realize that Candace was simply the Meroitic title meaning queen or mother of the crown prince. The Cushites gave special honor to their queens because they believed that the kings, who were sons of these women, were also sons of the great god, Amun. In other words, they imagined that these ladies were wives of the god and mothers of the living gods or the kings. If a king died, his wife might rule alone while her son was growing up. The people would worship her like a goddess. When the Romans went to war against Cush, they reported that the Cushite army was led by a Candace who was a massive, powerful woman, covered with jewels and elaborate robes and blind in one eye. Neriglissar was silent for a moment, as his mind raced. Check this out. Did you know that when Jerusalem and Judea were left desolate, most people were either killed, held in captivity, or were refugees fleeing in different groups to remote lands as far as South Africa? All that remained in Israel was the defiant little garrison atop the mount at Masada, a fortress complex south of the Dead Sea built by Herod the Great. In the end, the entire Jewish nation was scattered throughout the earth. They called this the Second Exile or Edom Exile, even the Jewish leaders. An elite were exiled, killed, or sold into slavery. They tried to make a comeback in 132 CE, under Bar Kokhba, rebelling against Hadrian. But 2 years later, Hadrian's army defeated the Jewish armies, and Jewish independence was lost. As their punishment, Hadrian changed the name of Jerusalem to Aelia Capitolina, turned it into a pagan city, and banned the Jews from living there. Hadrian renamed Judea and Samaria to Syria Palestina. Check this out, Neriglissar said. Wanyanyekova reply. I'm still checking, Neriglissar said. I'm trying to make a connection here. Wanyanyekova reply. Go ahead, I'm listening. Neriglissar rubbed his beard, thinking. There were many, and I mean many, great African nations, but there are at least 10 African kingdoms many don't know about. Well, I didn't know about. One was the Bornu. Pointing to the word, Wanyanyekova said. Bornu Empire. Neriglissar said. Okay, the Bornu Empire grew into the Kanem Empire, in northeastern Nigeria. At its height, it covered not only much of Chad, but also parts of southern Libya and eastern Niger, northeastern Nigeria, and northern Cameroon. By the late 11th century, this same kingdom became known as the Islamic Saifa. Pointing to the word, Wanyanyekova said. Saifawa or Saifawa dynasty. Neriglissar said. Saifawa or Saifawa dynasty, which was founded by Humai or Hammei ibn Salamna. The Saifawa dynasty ruled for 771 years, making it one of the longest-lasting dynasties in human history. Then there was the Saw civilization which flourished in Middle Africa, and the Saw lived by the Shari River south of Lake Chad and territory that later became part of Cameroon and Chad. Saw were skilled workers in bronze, copper, and iron. Then there was the Shilluk Kingdom, the Bagirmi Kingdom, and the Wadai Empire, the Kingdom of Luba or the Luba Empire. In the Kingdom of Lunda and the Ajuran Empire, many of these tribes throughout Africa claimed Jewish ancestry. They observed Semitic traditions such as kosher-like dietary restrictions and slaughter practices, male circumcision, and strict rules against intermarriage. Many Semitic-sounding clan names were in Ghana, Nigeria, Mali, Uganda, Cameroon, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and even São Tomé, and other countries, as well. One that caught my eye was an African tribe called the Lemba, in South Africa. Now peep this. Wanyanyekova laughing. I'm peeping. Neriglissar was so engulfed in his words, and Wanyanyekova saw his glow and was excited as Neriglissar continued. We already spoke about this. I just wanted to confirm what you said. Did you know that the end of the slave trade was not the end of slavery? Before Wanyanyekevu could answer, Nariglisser continued, but Wanyanyekevu was proud of how Nariglisser was reacting and let him continue. Now, Britain has been considered the great liberator of enslaved African people after becoming the first to abolish the slave trade in 1807, and pressuring other countries to follow suit. Truth be told, Britain was the biggest exporter of Africans during the 18th century. For 200 years, Portugal had a monopoly on the export of Africans for enslavement. They estimate that during the 450 years of the transatlantic slave trade, Portugal transported over 4.5 million African captives, about 40% of the total. During the 18th century, however, when the slave trade accounted for transporting 6 million Africans, Britain was the worst transgressor responsible for the enslavement of almost 2.5 million people. Britain would continue the practice of slavery for another 26 years after abolishing the slave trade, which proved too costly thanks to slave rebellions. The United States also abolished the slave trade in 1807, but not slavery. Portugal followed suit in 1869, with its former colony Brazil abolishing it in 1888. The Mideast slave trade consisted of about 18.5 million deaths, and the toll of the Atlantic slave trade at 16 million. That amounts to 34.5 million deaths of one group of people. That does not include the deaths from the practice of slavery across the diaspora, which ended in Brazil around 1888, nor does it account for the centuries of colonialism across the continent. A scholar and historian named Dr. John Henrik Clarke placed the toll of African lives lost during the slave trade or the African Holocaust at about 150 million. Nariglisser repeated himself in anger. 150 million. I said all of that to say this: many slaves that were captured and spread all over the world were from places that the Jewish community moved to after both exiles, and I believe, if not all, most of them were the chosen people of Sabaoth, the 12 tribes of Israel, the original Jews. Wanyanyekevu shook his head. Well said. Nariglisser having a funny look on his face as he flipped through his tablet. I can't find the direct quote and not even sure if he said it or not, but I found articles and some documentaries that said that Adolf Hitler knew black Americans were truly the Jews of Israel. One article has Hitler saying, because the white Jews know the Negroes are the natural children of Israel. And to keep America's secret, the Jews would blackmail America. The Jews would extort America. Their world-dominant plan wouldn't work if the Negroes knew who they were. The white citizens of America will be terrified to know that they've been mistreating and discriminating and lynching the children of Israel all this time. They feared God will destroy them, as He destroyed Egypt, for doing the same thing. So, the Illuminati's elite keeps this a secret at all costs. But I found this in the Torah. Hold on. Placing his tablet between his legs and flipping through the notes, in the back of his Torah. Here it is. The book is The Nazis, World War II by Robert Edwin Herstein. Pointing with his finger, as they guided across the tablet, reading. Hitler said, America has stolen the Jews of God. His Jewry. The Negroes. They are the true Hebrews. What a foolish move, and a direct challenge to God. And they plan on moving these false white Jews into the state of Israel. America is desperate in its attempt to win this war using atomic bombs on Japan. America will destroy the entire world in its attempt to conquer it. Now, follow me to the Torah. Turn with me to Revelations 3 verse 9. Behold, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan, who says that they are Jews and are not. Nariglisser took a deep breath. I've read about proud moments, sad moments in our history. Reading about people like Dr. Samuel Counts, Granville Taylor Woods, Elizabeth Jennings, Dr. Chancellor Williams, Teresa Burroughs, Simone Biles. The Zoot Suit Riots, Central Park 5, Philip Emeagwali, Arkansas's Elaine Massacre, and the Clinton 12. Wanyanyekevu smiled at Nariglisser. What is a king without his kingdom? Just a man. But know this within your flesh, you are royalty, and because you are the child of Sabaoth, the Ultimate and Supreme King, you possess royalty in the spirit. You are twice blessed. Nariglisser smiled as a tear fell from his eyes. Wanyanyekova said before walking away, You shall be my counselor, to all who have been knocked down, and can't seem to get up. Study all cultures and traditions of men to serve, as a beacon of light to those who seek the light in Sabaoth, but can't see the light within themselves. Just. Then, as he was speaking, the people that left to find their families started returning. Everyone returned and spoke to Wanyanyekova. When we had no hope, you brought it to us. When we thought there was no such thing as love, you showed it to us. It appears that you might need our help. You have been selfless. Why should we be selfish? We will go and help you as you have helped us. Even with the power of Sabaoth, we are great, but as one, we are greater. Once all is well, we will find our loved ones. You have taught us what sense it makes for a finger, a toe, or even a hand to fight a war and leave the rest of the body behind. We will fight as one body. Who knows, some of our family might be where you are going. Wanyanyekova had tears in his eyes. Sabaoth is. Nariglisser interrupted, seeing he was happy, and said, Sabaoth is able. Wanyanyekova said, Yes, he is, but I was going to say Sabaoth is awesome.